Okay, hello, and welcome to this eSchool News webinar, Tips, Tools, and Solutions for Safe, Accessible, and Easy to Manage IT. My name is Kevin Hogan. I am the editor-at-large for eSchool News, and I am happy you are joining us today for what I know will be a very insightful and important conversation. This event is brought to you by Microsoft. Microsoft is the leading platform and productivity company for the mobile-first, cloud-first world, and its mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. In education, it's important to empower every student. Microsoft believes limitless potential is within every student, every educator, and every school. Together, we can unlock this potential by providing technology that empowers educators and inspires students. You can learn more at microsoft.com/education. Now, before we get to our conversation, I'd like to take a minute to go over some features of the platform that we're using for this webinar. This event is being recorded, so you won't have to worry about missing a thing. Within a few days, you'll receive an email message that contains a link to the recorded webinar, along with a PDF of the slides. If you have a question or a comment for the panelists, use the chat function, launching that on chat. I'm sure we all know how to do that by now. Feel free to use this feature to contact someone from the eSchool News team as well if you're having technical questions. So with these housekeeping items out of the way, let's get started with our conversation and some introductions. First, we have April Murdoch. April has supported cybersecurity and IT in more than 132 different companies. She is well-versed in multi-layered, complex environments and currently serves as the CISO for more than 60,000 users at Seattle Public Schools. Next, we have Caden Shear. Caden is a security, compliance, and identity technical specialist at Microsoft. Focusing on end-user experience, he supports K-12 and higher education in their journey to protect their students, faculty, and staff from cyber threats, bullying and harassment, and interruptions from learning. And last but certainly not least, Chelsea Thompson. Chelsea is a security technical specialist at Microsoft. She started her career helping organizations secure their environment by utilizing Microsoft's platform. She is a former member of the Microsoft Detection and Incident Response team. In her role there, she was one of the first on-site responders for cybersecurity breaches worldwide. She is providing thorough investigations for Microsoft customers and partners. She also worked for Solutions for Professionals, helping them advance their knowledge base and cybersecurity infrastructure. So really an impressive panel of folks. I'm really glad that they were able to take the time to share their insights on this hugely important topic. I've been having many of these conversations over the course of the past 2 years. Unfortunately, it's always been in the context of the pandemic, obviously, but even before then, in the time I call BP before the pandemic, network security was far and above the #1 concern for any tech director in any school district out there. And then even during the pandemic, some of those concerns were accelerated as we watched this great beta test of America's schools go remote over the course of 8 weeks. I mean, really, the number of books that will be written about this time eventually will be massive. I had the opportunity to talk to a lot of superintendents and tech directors as they were doing it, as well as the industry, which really Microsoft, as one of those companies, just really responding to the emergency in an incredible way. And I think we found a number of innovations that came out of the discoveries of that time. I'm hoping that's what we can focus on in this next hour. And I know, because of our previous conversations, I know that's going to be. But April, maybe we'll start off with you. Maybe we could take you back to March of 2020 and talk about how you've watched the evolution of your network security progress.
Yeah. Well, at Seattle, you would think we're leading edge, even bleeding edge, being this close to Microsoft and a number of other large technology folks. And I think we've got, Apple and even Facebook pretty close. But at the same time, we were a bit behind the times. We had a large installed base 53,000 kids and roughly 7 to 10,000, depending on how you count them, staff. And we only had about 6,000 deployed laptops as one-to-one devices. When we went through the whole pandemic piece, we did a deployment to get us from 6,000 devices to 60,000 devices in 6 weeks-ish. We also ended up having to try to provide internet for the kids at home that didn't have internet. We have 2,300 homeless kids, and those folks needed access to classes as well. And we had other challenges in a similar way with people who just didn't have good access to internet. So we ended up deploying thousands of hotspots in the same amount of time. And of course, teachers were pivoting because they hadn't been doing, either your flipped learning environments, or which we didn't, or doing all of this from home. It turned into kind of this crush of what we might have done in 2 years with a regular project of deploying laptops in a one-to-one. We crunched it down so tightly that there was unfortunately a lot of room for error. We had some interesting technical challenges. We tried to VPN all that traffic through our on-premise firewall and crushed it with all the VPN traffic. So we learned how to filter those devices in the field so that they were still protected against porn and malware and things of that nature. And at the same time, not crushing our internal network with all of those devices, trying to do simultaneous video streams. We ran into just a kind of an amazing challenge in so many different ways. We also contracted with new vendors to provide services in a big way. Microsoft stepped up and gave us the ability to do essentially phoning using Teams. Teachers were able to use it to call parents from home without giving out their personal cell numbers. Nurses and counselors were still in the loop and needed to be able to communicate with parents in a real-time way. So there were just a lot of changes in a very short period of time. And we also ended up spinning up a lot of vendor agreements and what do I want to call it? We had to do a lot of things very, very quickly, which in hindsight left some opportunities. So we can talk more about those later.
Yeah, now Caden, but this is some heavy duty network infrastructure upgrades that we're talking about. And I know, Microsoft being Microsoft, these are things that for decades the company has worked on. Maybe you didn't have too many planning sessions involving global pandemics, though, I suppose.
Yeah, that wasn't something that we were keeping on our radar. We weren't, you expect a lot of different things, but I actually was working in support for SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business during the very beginning of the pandemic. And so we saw a huge shift from on-prem file servers, teachers recording their lesson plans and putting it in OneDrive and losing it, and seeing these massive data migrations that, got so big that Microsoft actually had to start throttling the service during your local business hours. So as much as we like to be prepared and we want to help everyone succeed, that was a crunch time for everyone that required a lot of adaptability on both of our parts.
Yeah, and Chelsea, I know that from conversations I had, that even though everything else was locked down and shut down, the idea of ransomware and cyber threats continued to pace, if not really increase during that time, right?
Yeah, I would definitely say that the pace increased. I was on the DART team, so our incident response team, during the start of COVID, and we saw a shift in how ransomware attacks were occurring. For one, they normally didn't target certain industries, but during COVID, we saw that the school or education industry was targeted, if not one of the hardest industries hit. We also had to change the way we did things. So normally we would fly out to go help a customer to make sure that all our communication is secure. So it allowed us at Microsoft to also to take a new approach to how we look at security and how we can communicate with clients remotely. But there was definitely a shift in ransomware. We saw a nice little spike, I would say.
Right. Well, now, and I don't want to jinx anything here, but now that it seems that we're kind of coming out of the madness of it, and again, in other conversations, Many discoveries were made during that time, during that stress test. April, you talked a little bit about those. What were those discoveries that you had that you're now going to keep? Obviously, you're not going to go back to 6,000 devices. You're going to keep those, I'm assuming. Talk a little bit about how your work has changed and how the tools that you have changed to help support what is your new reality.
So yeah, everybody has a device, which is great. It allows us to do things like we've moved from paper to digital in things that we hadn't done before. Even things like time entry, timekeeping for some of our part-time staff was made online. Teachers are still maintaining their online classrooms, often posting syllabi and doing online classroom submissions for assignments. All of that is real time, often posted. It used to be that I think we required teachers to update their online grade status once a quarter. Now most of them are doing it weekly or even daily, which helps the kids. And some of the teachers were actually pretty good about doing it more frequently, but now it's pretty much across the board. Everybody is grading and keeping things kind of almost real time as far as education goes, so you know where you're at. We also saw a difference in the way that our assessments were done. And I think every kid having a device allows us to actually consume less time in the classroom. It used to be that we would camp and do assessments it felt like months at a time. And now with one-to-one devices, I think we can batch kids a lot faster and consume less overall teaching time in that space. And then, of course, from the cybersecurity point of view, I'm liking the visibility that I have on what everybody's doing all the time, everywhere, when I need to, in our forensic instances. The visibility I have with, for instance, Defender and the way that it uploads to the cloud allows me to see exactly what a student is doing when they decide to go tinker on a machine that we thought was locked down adequately enough and perhaps wasn't for what that student decided to try. As an example, one kid discovered that he could use a Razer mouse to get local admin rights on his machine, and then proceeded to try to download and install some rather nasty malware packages online. And we could see exactly what he ran, in what order, what things he attempted to do, all very clearly from our sort of cloud eye in the sky visibility, and hand that back both to the student and to the administrators and eventually to the parents to be very clear about what happened. There's a lot less finger pointing because we can show very clearly what happened and what didn't happen.
Wow, that's pretty pretty impressive, sophisticated stuff. Caden, is this what April's experiences? Is that what you see? Does it resonate with you with other districts that you work with around the country, even those that may not have 60,000 devices?
Oh, of course. Especially kids are intelligent. Kids will find a way to do what they want to do. Kids are your best pen testers. Take advantage of that. Whenever I know, because I talk to both higher education and K-12, when I talk to higher education about their students and the things they're doing, their students typically aren't, even if it's a managed device, aren't, tinkering around and selling malware on purpose. But when it comes to K-12, these kids are like, I can do it, and they don't think about the consequences. So they just find whatever way around it that they possibly can, and using Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, using Microsoft Defender for Office 365, being able to track for, harassment or bullying or certain languages, not languages, but certain, words in Teams can help schools be proactive, in that, stopping things before they happen, realizing that this kid is talking about, accessing this application before, sharing with his friends in Teams. So, there's a lot of ways that we have insight into what is going on our devices and with our data. And it's very, very prevalent in K-12 that they're going to find a way around that.
Now, I will qualify that and say that we actually found that getting this level of visibility and automation kept us from being quite so big brotherish watching that kind of conversation. We can now rely on the triggers to tell us when there's an issue, and we only follow up when we get the triggers. And so, for instance, when a kid's doing something suspicious at the command line or doing something in that space, we can follow up and drill down to whatever level detail we need. But I don't have to be sort of spying on the students proactively. The system is doing a really good job of letting me know when things are going on.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And I should have also clarified that by proactively addressing, I meant you're getting an alert and then able to address it rather than sitting, and doing e-discovery requests all day to see what kind of stuff your students are doing. Yeah, definitely a lot of automation that's going to let you know when you need to take action.
And I'll assume that this is kind of a BP before pandemic versus after a pandemic, that, when you now have 60,000 students with devices, just a matter of numbers, right? That where maybe students might not have been the primary, instigator before. Now you've got a bulk afterwards. Does that sound right, Chelsea? In terms of the threat actors who might be going in and trying to hit into a network.
Yeah, in terms of the threat actors, can you go to Caden, please? Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Caden, sorry, Chelsea, you're suffering.
I think I can.
Chelsea was so lovely to join us. So yeah, April, if you'd like to take this one.
Sure. I will say that now I have 60,000 devices out there. Most of them go home. Kids are on them at night, on the weekend, when they're bored out of their minds. So there's a lot more time that they're poking at them. And they get younger. My current batch of kids that are doing things like intentionally installing malware are 5th graders, right? 10-year-olds.
Brave new world, Caden.
Yep.
Well, let's talk about how, again, I mean, you were talking about some of the tools and the particular features of Defender. Give us a kind of a day-to-day use of it, kind of a day in the life of where, when you walk in, is this something that you're constantly monitoring, or as you said, like you just have the flags that come up? You talk about how you use these tools on a day-to-day basis.
We do use them on a day-to-day basis. We obviously respond to alerts where suspicious things have happened or where Microsoft might flag a user as high risk. Or worse, maybe we see some active attempt at installing malware. And that also happens from drive-by, right? You have that many machines. If I'm rolling dice 60,000 times, somebody somewhere has clicked on something stupid, right? So I have to be able to follow up on those. And where the machine may, protect itself, or maybe it'll just send me a warning and I need to go do something. The other thing, by the way, I love about Defender when I have, the remote cloud ability is to be able to click and say, isolate that box. I'll follow up with it later. That allows me weekends, evenings, whatever. If I need to suspend a machine so it can't do harm because it's been infected in some way, I can just reach out and do that. And, it's kind of one of those stay safe and then follow up in the morning and figure out what happened. That's been huge for us. We've been able to do that with users before, but being able to do that for a machine or a server has been huge also. And at some point, when we have a little later in this, perhaps I can show you some of what I do to monitor the whole sort of fleet of devices and how we can tell where we have one-off issues. Because in a fleet of 60,000 machines and 700 some servers, there's going to be differences in configuration. There's going to be software vulnerabilities. There's going to be issues that need to be tracked and addressed. And the tools give me that too.
Just to piggyback, go ahead.
No, please.
I think that's one of the amazing things that has come out of all these attacks because of COVID is we were able to take all of the user impact from schools, from different industries, and put those features into the tools, right? So users want something that is easy to use out of the box and just clicking a few buttons, and it's not something that is hard to manage. So I think the feedback that we have taken and implemented to Defender for Endpoint has been amazing so far.
Yeah, that really does prove the rule that this was a great beta test, right? I mean, just you had the users out there using the technology and being able to record that data has just helped in that acceleration. But Kate, I'll come back to you again. Are these features and functions that April is talking about, are they important for a smaller district as much as a larger district? Talk about how these compare when you put a different scale on the size of a school district.
Yeah, no, I would say it is just as important, if not more important, when you have a smaller school district. When you have K-12s that have maybe 2 IT people, they may have an hour a day to devote to security and 30 minutes to devote to compliance. They don't have time to be proactive. They're overwhelmed. And the tools that are available in the security stack and in the compliance stack have a lot of ability to automate behaviors, to have easy to read reports. If there is a device that is hit with ransomware, we can build an automated response that's going to isolate that device when ransomware is detected, so that, okay, it's isolated, it's safe, it's not going to be harming other things around it, and I can get to it when I have time. So that's huge. And then going into the proactive reporting, I mean, there's the secure score, there's the compliance manager, all of these things that give you a score that tell you what is your posture in the cloud. And they will have quick actionable things that you can go in and do to raise that score up. So if you don't have MFA enabled for your admin accounts, that is worth 9 points. And then it gives you the steps to turn on MFA for your admin accounts. You go and do that, and within 24 hours, it will reflect that you've done that, and your score is 9 points higher. So that gives you direction. You feel like you have to do so many different things and that it's unmanageable. And then here's Microsoft giving you a list in order from most critical to least critical, and you can take action on that.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. And I mean, even to have that sort of functionality for something that for a district that doesn't have that many students, but you still have the power of something that April's carrying. April, maybe you want to go a bit deeper into, I know you have some visuals for us that can maybe give this theoretical conversation a little bit more depth.
Sure, let me go ahead and step through that. I can even start with where we mitigated an issue that the Microsoft tools highlighted for us.
Great.
Here we go. Let me know, you see my screen okay? So, yes, no? Everybody
Yep.
see it? Okay. So here's one where we had an older version of Firefox deployed, and it was on nearly 20,000 machines. And we were being called out for it because there were active exploits. That's what this little bug means. There's active exploits that could potentially create a drive-by situation where a kid or a staff member could go to a website and potentially get infected through Firefox. And when we fixed it, you can see, here's our fix. It impacted 20,000 devices, and now it was, 32%. We fixed them all, and you can see the scores get adjusted as we fix these kinds of things that are called out. And it's got other things that it suggests that we fix. But there's other nice to haves in here too. As an example, here's a list of all the applications that we have that Microsoft is tracking in this context. This is what they call the inventory. And for those who care, I'm inside the security.microsoft.com/vulnerability management inventories. And what's neat about this one is it'll tell me both that this is in my environment. This isn't just like a list that comes from the feds or the list that comes from some other vendor. This is known in my environment. There's executables tied to it. This is a threat. There's a public way to make use of this weakness. And it'll tell me how many machines I have that are affected by it. And then I can drill down and specifically mitigate those machines. So as you can see here, I've got, these are specific CVEs, which are vulnerabilities that are called out. Tells me, these are big deal. This is, 10 out of 10 need to be worried about this. And it's something that hasn't been updated in a while. Thankfully, out of my 60,000 machines, I have 11 in this category and 1 in this category. But it will let me go find that machine, and it'll tell me which program, where the executable is, and I can choose to isolate it or remove the app or whatever it is I need to do. But this calls it out very, very clearly so that I can see the threat, if it matters to me in my environment, and where it matters. And then it'll even go so far as to tell me, and this, by the way, works on Linux machines too, it'll even give me hints, remediation hints on how to fix it if I don't know where to go with it. So this has been pretty huge for us in terms of tracking what it is we're doing across lots of devices, but it also handholds me as far as I want it to. which has been also helpful, because there's, in any K-12, no matter what your size is, whether you have dedicated cybersecurity folks or not, there's more work than there are people.
Very impressive. So we've been talking a lot about cloud security, right? The monitoring and the detection and the protection to secure data. Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about the ideas of the trust and security suite and some of the automated compliance templates and some of the AI-powered security that protects devices and apps. Cade, maybe I'll throw that one to you. You can kind of start us off with kind of the big picture on what that all means.
Yeah, so when we start looking at, compliance in terms of data, it's not just about protecting the data. So it's about protecting the identities that are going to be accessing the data. It's about protecting the endpoints that the identities who are accessing the data are using. It's about protecting the applications that might be storing and accessing that data. And there's a lot of it. I think it's every 2 years, the amount of data you have doubles. I might be wrong on that statistic, so don't quote me, but data is multiplying. I don't know if you've ever signed into your iCloud account and looked at it and, shown pictures from, 20 years ago. Yeah, iCloud account 20 years ago, but you've never looked at them, you've never touched them, you're not going to go back in and regularly clean that up. It's the same for organizations, whether you're education, commercial, you have data just hanging around and you don't necessarily know what that data is. You don't know if there's any regulatory requirements. You don't know if you should have cleaned it up and got rid of it by now. So we see, we saw a big transformation over COVID, and I don't know if it was because people are moving to the cloud, but around the Microsoft, we call it Microsoft Purview now. It was our compliance suite of tools. And we have one specifically called the Compliance Manager. So we can go in, run these assessments, create our own assessments to scan your organization to see what your compliance baseline is and where you need to improve that. And you can use the premium assessments. So if you have to be compliant with FERPA, you can run a FERPA assessment on your M365 environment or your Azure environment to make sure that you are doing the things that you need to do so you don't get fined if there is a breach, that data is protected, and that data is being stored somewhere safe and secure.
So it's like Grammarly. Is that a primitive assessment? But it's working through your data and it's an auditing tool that's putting that together.
Yeah, so it's running an assessment rather than kind of like an audit. You can go back and audit all that, but it's actually looking at the structure of, not the structure, but the posture of Microsoft as a whole, not Microsoft, but your Microsoft environment as a whole, to make sure that you have the correct data loss prevention policies in place and you're retaining data as long as you need to. So it's just going through and checking those boxes. And I see April has something.
Yeah, we've turned on DLP to watch for any time somebody sends out social security numbers. And we pattern match for that and flag it so that we can ask the user to send it out a different way, encrypt it, or use a method that is secure instead of trying to send it via clear text email. Things like that you can use it for too. And we can also use it to identify where people are storing those things in places maybe they shouldn't.
Yeah. And another thing I see a lot of schools doing, which I think is amazing, is not only auditing what data is, but also doing things like data loss prevention, but putting in different enforcement policies. So not allowing students to communicate with the principal, or not allowing students to send messages that might indicate bullying between each other. So the tool can actually go in and audit, alert, and even block some words from being sent between users and students.
My favorite feature with what Chelsea has mentioned is the OCR capabilities, the optical character recognition. So if I send you a meme and it's not a very nice meme, we have the ability to pick up on that with our harassment classifiers, and make an alert saying, Kaden just sent Chelsea a meme that has a very rude phrase in it, and I'm going to get talked to by my teacher, by my counselor, for the harassment that I have done towards Chelsea.
That's amazing. So that's kind of the artificial intelligence element of some of that, and are those recent advancements that are being baked in?
Yep. So we have had these capabilities for probably 2 years or so now, and they were okay. They weren't the best. They did an okay job. April's making a face. I'm being generous, okay? No, I'm being generous here. They really struggled, and that was feedback. Once schools had gotten through the initial move to the cloud and deploying Microsoft Defender for endpoints, and they got their security stuff squared away, they started looking at the compliance stuff, and they were like, this is not working. My teachers are still communicating with students in a way we don't want them communicating. Our teachers are finding workarounds. Our students are finding workarounds. Our students are still saying inappropriate things in private one-on-one chats. Microsoft, do something. So the last 6 months or so, we've had a lot of updates come out around making sure that we can silo our students from, faculty that is not their teacher, or silo them from the principal so that they can't communicate. And then also a lot of work around the AI ML around harassment and cyberbullying. And they've actually retired the old policies and rolled out new ones that are working so much better than they used to.
I mean, so it sounds to me that policies and human behavior are just important elements as the technology itself. April, would that be a fair thing to say?
Policies help. I will say that we turned that off because there were so many false alarms when we used it a year ago. So I am encouraged to hear that it's significantly improved. But don't forget, and the school districts know this, when you turn those kind of features on and you start getting notifications of that kind of thing, you need staff to be able to do the work and do the interventions. And we didn't plan the staffing for that properly when we first turned that on, and we were buried. Now, to be fair, it was legitimate stuff for the most part. I mean, there were a lot of false alarms when we did this a year ago, but there were definitely legitimate concerns that needed to be followed up. But when you do this, do it intentionally, have the staffing, the counseling staff, the security staff, your protocols for escalation when it needs to get escalated. All of those people and process issues need to be tagged with the technology issues to make this successful. But I'll go look at that again. I turned it off for a while.
I appreciate you taking another look at it. And it does use AI and machine learning. So as you're getting alerts that are false positives, flagging them as false positives helps train that. It helps it understand that this is not harassment, or maybe this is, something that could be conceived as harassment, but Chelsea and I are really good friends. And if I say something to her, it may be okay because it's between us. Rather, if I was saying it to somebody who I wasn't friends with, it would look pretty mean. So it's going to start to learn that kind of stuff and stop, bubbling up all of these alerts that are not, true alerts. It's not going to be 100% perfect, but it does get better after you've trained it for a couple of weeks.
We trained it with hundreds of things, but
yeah.
I heard that you changed the algorithm, so hopefully, yeah.
Well, I mean, this is a constantly evolving situation, right? I mean, the threats continue to roll in and become more sophisticated. The tools need to react to it, and then users need to change their behaviors accordingly. Chelsea, do you feel that that we're winning this race against these cyber attackers?
I think we're closing the gap. I don't think we're winning just yet. But I can definitely see a lot of progress that has occurred. A lot of schools, they have the capabilities to leverage all these tools. They just don't know how. So there's a lot of exploring how the features work and putting them into place, getting the policies rolling out. I think April School's system is an excellent example. So yeah, I think the technologies have been out there for a while, but now we're starting to get organizations to implement it. And I think the more schools, or just in general, people who implement the tools and different policies, will then slow down the attacks overall and make it not as lucrative of a business. So right now, for example, ransomware is a very lucrative business because it's easy to attack a school. But the harder you make it, then the barriers to enter it will kind of deter some attackers. So yeah, I think we're closing the gap, to answer the question in short.
Okay. Now, April, for folks who might be on the call here today who are not as progressive when it comes to using these tools, maybe they have them, maybe they're there and they're just not being utilized. What sort of advice would you give them to start making those advances?
Well, to be fair, I'd start more basic than that, right? There are configurations that can make you safer just from the get-go. So step back a little bit and look at things like making sure you're not giving your users admin rights by default, right? Make sure that you're you're using your general configuration tools to block things like Word or Excel infected macro documents at the gate, which you can do with the Microsoft tool configurations. There's a lot of kind of practical things that you should do to keep yourself from being a ransomware victim. Another thing to keep in mind is MFA. MFA is the win, right? If you can get your staff to use MFA, you will find that even if a bad guy manages to steal a username and a password, it'll be a lot harder for them to use that username and password. Guard your remote access in the same way. Don't allow a username and a password to be the only thing needed to get remote access into your system. So most of those are practical things that don't necessarily need whiz-bang tools, but I'll tell you, I sleep so much better at night being able to remotely isolate a machine when it misbehaves, and remotely isolate a user as needed. For that matter, a server. So it's having the tools fully deployed, auditing to make sure it's installed everywhere it needs to be installed. All of that makes a big difference. And then, of course, using the tools, spending time with the tools so that you know what normal looks like, so you can recognize abnormal, where you know that they are false alarms versus real alarms. And I will say that Microsoft has gotten so much better at that. I'm trusting the system rather than second guessing it every time I go look at a report. So thank you, and I appreciate the ongoing work in that space.
Well, and Caden and Chelsea, maybe I'll throw that same question to both of you in terms of advice for districts who might be already Microsoft districts but aren't fully utilizing Defender and some of these compliance features. What are the first steps that you would recommend they take?
You want me to go first, Chelsea?
Please.
Okay. So I always kind of look at the zero trust architecture, which we know that the zero trust architecture is not a set of technologies. It's kind of an yep, we can't say it. That's okay. We're moving on. But it's a state of mind. There we go. Thank you. And when I look at that, we have 6 pillars. The first 2 pillars that Microsoft always recommends you start with is endpoints and identity. So again, following exactly what April did, getting Microsoft Defender for Endpoint installed, getting some basic, configurations installed on those devices to block macros, to make sure that all of the downloads are scanned before they're open, and then going in and handling the identity pieces. So, there is a lot of amazing identity tools in the Microsoft suite, from MFA to conditional access policies to risk-based conditional access policies. So if a sign-in, if I as a user sign in here at my home in Virginia, and then all of a sudden I'm signing in France, that's kind of weird. I don't have a plane that travels that fast. I don't know how to teleport, so that's going to drive my user risk up. And as my user risk goes up, as that score, it hits a certain threshold and it goes, okay, you need to stop and you need to change your password and complete an MFA challenge. So, you know, there's a lot of powerful tools to be able to protect your endpoints and your identities. And then moving on from there, you start looking at, how do I protect my applications? How do I protect my data? And you've already built the foundation to protect those items because you have your endpoints and your identities secured.
Oh, that's a lot. Chelsea, anything to top that?
I think those are all great points, and I agree with April. Also, with on the notion of starting as simple as possible. It doesn't have to be an expensive or outrageously hard process. One of the main things I always tell organizations to start with is first the MFA for your admins. If not all the users, the admins must have MFA.
Can you describe what? I'm sorry to interrupt.
I'm so sorry.
What is an MFA?
So MFA stands for multi-factor authentication, and that is essentially having 2 layers of authentication for each user. So one layer might be a password, that's what we traditionally see, and another layer might be something that the user has, which can be a YubiKey, or it can be something they know, or something that, or biometrics, so it could be their eyes or fingerprint. I am a big fan of the biometrics, and I don't even know what my password is on my devices anymore. I just use my thumb or my face. That is what I'm all about right now. So I have my phone, I scan my face, those are my 2 factors. So for your admins, all those accounts should be MFA'd, because that's what the attackers are after. They don't want a 2-year-old's account or a 5th grader's account. They want that admin's account. And what happens is most organizations, when you pass out these laptops, well, that admin signed in and set up that machine. So when you give it to that 5th grader and then their account gets compromised, the attacker is able to grab the credentials off that machine. And that brings me to my second recommendation, which is a free solution called Lapse. It's a Microsoft product. That is the second thing I encourage all organizations to use. One of the first things we do on the DART team, free solution, easy to download, easy to set up, and it's been around since like, I think early 2000s. I could be wrong. Maybe 19, I don't know.
Last century?
Yeah. Go ahead. I think April's holding the finger up, so let me go ahead.
Oh, just 2 things. Yeah, Lapse is wonderful because it basically means that the admin passwords on every machine are different. And therefore, if it gets stolen on one, it can't be used to compromise its neighbor. But related to that is also Microsoft's ability to do BitLocker. We get laptops lost and stolen pretty frequently, and having those machines encrypted means it's a lot harder for people to steal data off of them.
Wow, that's pretty powerful as well. So that's just even beyond the data, but the actual devices that you're trying to secure, right? Now, through this conversation, each of you have mentioned staff at one point or another. Let's talk a little bit about the importance of professional development when it comes to the user end of things. And we'll start with, you talked about the admins, Chelsea, but what about the instructors as well? Are there things that, even again, as we've gone through this huge experiment, everyone hopefully now is comfortable with this sort of interaction using a platform like this? Maybe there's been a lot more of an understanding of the importance of technology in the classroom, but are there still ways in which faculty and staff need to be educated in terms of human behaviors and network security? And I'll throw that one at you, Chelsea, first.
Oh yeah, so user education is probably the biggest gap we have. I would say in the security industry, I think overall the industry is still trying to figure out the best way to educate users effectively. Because it's one thing to throw a bunch of training at someone, it's another thing for them to actually understand and be able to respond to the threats based off that training. So I definitely think overall there's a gap there. But utilizing something like the phishing training for users. Another thing is equip the users with tools to be successful. A non-Microsoft tool that I recommend organizations to try, or in general, is a password manager. Give those to all of your staff, right? Give them the ability to create strong passwords. So I think something like LastPass is a great password manager. So I think for one, doing the user education, but also giving the staff the tools to be successful.
Does that resonate, April? I mean, talk a little bit about how you go about educating staff.
So we have more of a voluntary process. You have to negotiate with the unions in advance for the amount of time you want to spend training. And it can get expensive and it can be time consuming. And so we've done two things. We've required it of new hires because we churn through, I think, something like 25% of our staff a year anyway. And so new hires go through cybersecurity orientation and do some trainings. We do phishing exercises only once a year, but we're rethinking how we do that. I've seen some new phishing training. Wiser in particular has some neat training videos that I think are free, available, and really easy to follow and easy to understand. But they've also got some gamification pieces where you can, if you find someone who enjoys phishing tests, or not, I shouldn't say phishing tests in an enjoyment way, but you can use them as a challenge and maybe reward them with chocolate bars or something if you can get to the end of this phishing sequence, because it gets harder and harder and harder. And even IT staff will fail some of them, but it's a challenge and it's made more of a game rather than a gotcha, right? What you don't want to do is penalize people or make them feel like you're trying to trap them or cause them harm in some way. You need to make it where reporting a phish is automatic and something that they want to do to help their peers. You want to reward the behavior. You want to encourage them to think before they click. I'd rather get lots of false alarms of things that they think are phishes than to not have them report. So it's part of that's building a culture where you encourage people to participate and don't make them feel like they're entrapped.
Right. And Caden, can you talk a little bit about the importance of that human behavior on top of the technology that's there, especially when it comes to staff?
Yeah, well, we definitely, the industry has coined a term called the Human Firewall, and I think that's very valid. I hear a lot of my universities and my K-12s, part of their whole cyber awareness training is if you see something, say something, trying to get people involved and excited and aware. I think probably where I have seen end user awareness be the most successful in all of my accounts. Well, this isn't even one of my accounts, but one of the accounts that I have worked with in the past, they have a whole end user security awareness that is available to anyone. It's available to their students, it's available to the families, it's available to the teachers, because unfortunately during the pandemic, your IT person was your mom, or your IT person was your teacher. And so during that time, they had a lot of teachers that were like, I don't know how to get my kids help. I don't know how to troubleshoot these issues. I don't know how to tell them what they should be concerned about when they get an email that looks kind of weird. So putting together something that is targeting your entire organization and making it a free resource has been, very impactful for a lot of my accounts versus here's your mandatory training. Don't fail the phishing test, otherwise we're going to put you on the wall of shame. Like, that just doesn't work. And, doing what April said, the gamification, the carrot, not the stick, really gets people involved. And at my the last company I worked at before I came to Microsoft, that was a huge thing. I had one of the clients that I worked with was an accounting firm, and they were so excited to show me what phishing email they found this week. They're like, Kaden, this one has an attachment. Can you run this in your sandbox thing and let me know what it does? Because they got to that point where, it wasn't shameful to be confused by an email. And that's what I hope for. That's what I hope for all of my accounts, is they can get to a place where they are excited to share the phishing emails they got.
That's an interesting way to think about it, just culturally, that it's just you're turning a negative into a positive almost, right? Well, I see we're almost getting to the top of the hour here, but I have a few more questions that I want to get through before we wrap things up. I guess the first one is kind of like looking forward. We talked about this dramatic acceleration that we had with networks and this dramatic transformation. April, and I'll start with you, and then ask Caden and Chelsea to kind of give us the big picture on it. Where do you see that acceleration continuing at pace over the next couple of years, or are we going to kind of go into a place now where we're going to kind of, as Chelsea was talking, continue to close the gap? Where do you see your work using these sort of tools and practices going forward in the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, on the technical side, I think I see a bit more automation happening. We're already starting to see it, like for our high-risk users, forcing them to re-MFA, even if they're on-premise. But there's other places where I'd like to see more automation and detection and response. When I'm rolling the dice on 60,000 users and machines, stuff goes wrong, right? I need to be able to detect it, and I need to be able to respond quickly. And sometimes that's after hours or on the weekend. And in our case, we have a managed service response group that will actually pick up those alerts and respond on our behalf. But at some level, I have to be able to trust the machines to shut that down. And so I think I'm going to see more sophistication. We call it SOAR, where we're basically trying to do the automation and response when we get those events, and basically cut off the ransomware attacks and similar attacks at the knee, so that even if they get one machine, they can't spread, right? I think we're going to see more of that sort of zero trust model happening by design. New systems will come in and sort of be deployed in a different model. Instead of starting open and trying to shut doors, we're going to start with closed doors and open things up as needed. And the tools will be better at making that easy for the smaller districts who don't have the time to finesse all of the settings that are necessary. But I see a lot more in automation. Unfortunately, I see the bad guys using artificial intelligence. I see the bad guys using a lot of cloud resources. Case in point is we're seeing phishing getting more sophisticated. They intercept a conversation maybe, and inside they're responding within that conversation with documents types or subject lines that match the conversation. They've already gathered, because of previous phishing success, lots of contact lists, and they're building matrices of relationships, and they're using those relationships that the AI and their systems have developed to create some pretty specific phishing targeted attacks. We're also seeing a lot more attacks where they completely mock up a copy of our intranet or external web interface to fake us out. There was a somewhat successful phish that cloned our site and then prompted for username, password, driver's license, social security number, right? We got it shut down pretty quickly. I think it was 13 people that were affected. But it wasn't. Don't
tell me that was a fifth grader that did that.
No. I'm just saying the bad guys are getting more sophisticated in their work, and because they've automated it. It used to be, it was a big deal to have somebody clone your site. It must have taken them some time. So, maybe they'll only target a Seattle, but they won't target, a smaller district. But now the tools are making it so easy that they can do it to any size. The effort to do those targeted attacks is getting reduced. So I see a lot of automation, good and for the good guys and for the bad guys, unfortunately.
Yeah, Chelsea, maybe you can talk a little bit about, you talked about closing that gap and some of the concerns that April has. I mean, do you see that gap continuing to be able to be closed despite these sophisticated attacks?
Yeah, I do think we'll continue to make progress to close the gap, either by choice or by force. What I have seen a lot of is that there are a lot of policies that are coming down that force schools and different organizations to have things like MFA in place. So a lot of cyber insurance companies will not give a company any type of insurance unless they have basic security policies in place. So if you don't have MFA, if you don't have something to protect your admin credentials, if you don't have something to prevent data loss prevention, they will not give you cyber insurance anymore. So I think the higher ups are going to keep pushing policies down to force this gap to close.
And Caden, go ahead, April.
We are MFA'd, but that doesn't save you from all of the threats, right? Phishing can still be successful even if they're not phishing for the username and password in question. They're phishing for other things.
And Caden, I need to give you a chance for your horizon, for your crystal ball. Give us some of your thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to say that it's already been said what I was going to say. So, I think we're spot on. I think we'll get to a point where things are going to be more difficult for the attackers, where it's going to cost them more time, money to keep up with schools who are rolling out Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. They're going to have to spend more time figuring out how to get around the AI and the ML of that. I think it's going to keep evolving, and I think it's going to keep going back and forth. But what I hope is that the profit that they are making is eventually offset by the amount of effort it's going to take. And I do think we're going to get there. Very hopeful for it, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I love having these conversations where you have the educator and the users, as well as the industry and the vendors. And I mean, it's just been so illuminating to hear the back and forth. But I usually like to end up these conversations by giving April, in this case, the opportunity to give Chelsea and to Caden your wish lists for going forward. If everything was, if it were a perfect world, what are some of the features and functions that you would love to have that Chelsea and Caden can take back to their teams?
Well, what I wish for, they probably can't help me with, but I so love Sentinel, and I so love the ability to collect and respond to the events. I want to point more stuff at my Sentinel space. The problem is that the cost to doing that is pretty high. So if we can lower the cost to add events to Sentinel so that my responses have more and more depth, like I can throw DHCP stuff up there so I can figure out who's where. I can throw up, DNS queries. I can throw up all kinds of stuff. There's content that I would like Sentinel to have at its disposal while it's trying to help me figure out who done it. That's kind of expensive right now. So if we can lower the cost of that, that would make me very happy, because then I can use my tools even more.
That is definitely something that we hear, especially Chelsea and I being kind of frontliners with security teams in K-12 and higher education. It is something that we have been talking to the product group about, and no promises, but they are aware that it is very, costly to get everything that you could dream of into Sentinel. With that being said, with Microsoft Defender for Cloud coming out, if you're going to be licensing your servers with Microsoft Defender for Cloud P2, it does give you some free ingest. I think it's 500 megs per license per month that you get. So that's, there are some ways that we are working in to offset the cost of Sentinel from you, kind of back onto Microsoft, I would say, but it is something we're aware of. And I'm harassing them personally on it, I promise.
I appreciate that. And for the smaller districts, I think making baseline security a default that they don't have to charge, that they don't have to pay for special. I mean, making things like MFA and the ability to do conditional access should be available to everybody and not just to the folks that pay for it.
Yep, spot on.
All right, well, we'll have that stuff by Monday, April. I'll make a couple calls on that too. Well, I see that our time is up here, and I really appreciate, again, the insights and more than a few tips here on how districts can continue to improve their security coming out of COVID, going into the future. Continuing to go toe-to-toe with the cyber criminals that are out there, and as their technologies improve, hopefully the technologies on this side, and it seems like with the type of technologies and practices that Microsoft has, and innovative educators like April can employ them, that we will keep up the good fight. So once again, thanks again for a very informative presentation, and I'd like to thank all the audience members for joining us as well. As a reminder, you'll get an email within the next few days that contains a link to this recording along with the slides. Thanks again for participating, and have a great day. Thanks, guys.